Zimbabwean journalist Hopewell Chin'ono has vowed to keep fighting COVID-19 corruption. The government critic was released on bail yesterday after the state charged him with inciting public violence for calling on Zimbabweans to partake in anti-corruption protests in late July. Chin'ono joins us now live from Harare. Hopewell, good evening, and thank you so much for your time. The Zimbabwean community, the South African community, and I dare say the world over, there's been great concern about you and about your well-being. How are you?
I'm mentally strong. I was in prison for 6 weeks, and I guess the idea was to break my spirit and that of my colleague Jacob Ngaruvume, who was arrested together with me. The only problem that I had whilst I was in prison was I developed a fever from Sunday last week, and I'm still recovering from it.
Let's talk about your conditions while under arrest. What were those like?
They were horrible. In fact, it was a front row seat for me as a journalist to see the effects of corruption in my country. The prisoners fed the traditional staple meal sadza with boiled beans or boiled cabbages and nothing else. And that's what they eat 24/7 all year round. There's no running water in the cells. The cells are meant for 16 people, but they are housing over 44 people per cell. People can hardly turn whilst they are sleeping because they are packed like sardines. They could not even get a BP testing machine when my doctor came to have a look at me when I was not feeling well. There's a COVID outbreak in the prison, and they are being economic with the facts. Prisoners are not being told what's really happening, and when they are found out to have contracted COVID, they're isolated, there's no medication, they're only given hot water to drink. So it's like a concentration camp, but it's symptomatic of what has become of our country, Zimbabwe.
Let's talk about the physical aspect of things, because there were also great concerns that you may have come under abuse during your incarceration, that is physically. Did that happen at all?
No, there was no physical abuse at all. They would not have done that to us. But there is rampant physical abuse on other prisoners who don't have the kind of prominence that I have and that my other two colleagues have. So they're very careful of how they treat people like myself and people like Job Sikala or Jacob Ngaruvume. The other guy was arrested with me. But there is violence in the prison where prison officers beat up inmates. For any of the slightest mistakes that they can make, they get beaten up.
You were denied bail 3 times, and I'm curious to know, all of those times that your legal representatives were going to court, making representations, and this was being denied, what did you perceive was the intention of the legal system at the time?
The legal system was being used to settle a political score. Our arrest, we have concrete information that it was directed from the president's office. The real reason why now was accused by ZANU-PF, they held a press conference before my arrest saying that I was tarnishing the image of the president and his family because his children were involved in some of the COVID deals.
And one of the charges that you were faced with was, of course, inciting violence, and there were even insinuations that you were attempting to bring down the ZANU-PF government in Zimbabwe. Is that your intent?
That's not true at all. That was a trumped-up charge to try and justify my persecution and my justified arrest. what we said was that there's so much corruption in Zimbabwe, there is need for people to use constitutional avenues that are available to citizens to protest against corruption. We never said that we wanted violence, and I'm against violence. I've done an award-winning film showing the state performing violence against citizens. So I would never, ever be at the forefront of advancing a violent agenda.
Of course, some of the questions that the governing ZANU-PF had to answer was the extent to which your arrest and that of other activists actually spoke to the fact that the democracy in Zimbabwe is under threat, and many saying that, in fact, there is no democracy in Zimbabwe. But the government saying that it's a fully functioning and well-functioning democratic state, and that anybody externally has no reason to be worried. Is that the case?
That's not the case, and I'm sure the world has been seeing case after case. I'm not the first and probably won't be the last to be arrested under these spurious charges. Zimbabwe, the rule of law has broken down. It's really difficult to understand how our government, on one hand, intends to attract investors, and yet on the other hand, uses jackboot tactics to try and silence people like myself, who are journalists, who are doing their work, who are exposing corruption. I spent 6 weeks, Cathy, in the maximum prison, one of the worst prisons in Zimbabwe. And yet the men that are exposed to have been at the forefront of looting millions of dollars meant for COVID was walking in the streets. Whilst I was in prison, the man who stole that money and was at the forefront of that looting of public funds was stealing money that was meant to buy masks for prisoners. And whilst I was in Chikurubi prison, I was shocked because the prisoners did not have masks. So what I exposed is exactly what I then saw whilst I was in prison, the consequences of what I exposed. So such a state and such a regime cannot talk about democracy when it fails to fulfill the fundamental rights of citizens. For example, providing masks for prisoners.
And, you know, it's not just citizens who are affected by this, but you as a journalist who needs to be able to do your work under the protection of knowing that you have freedom of speech. Do you feel that that is a right that you have access to, that you can enjoy freedom of speech? Are you confident to leave your house and continue doing your work without feeling that there will be reprisal?
They always threaten us. The ruling party held a couple of press conferences intimidating me, threatening me before I was arrested. So I knew the arrest was coming because that's how they operate. As for freedom of speech, it's now a situation where we are able to speak, but we are not sure of what happens after we speak. The idea of incarcerating a well-known journalist like myself is to try and intimidate, instill the fear of God in young journalists, to say that if you write about President Mnangagwa, then this is how we are going to handle you. They even withdrew my lawyer from my case to say that to send a message to young journalists to say, we don't care even if you come with a big lawyer, we will remove that lawyer and we will persecute you.
Social media had been critical to how you were able to get the message out about some of the corruption that you were seeing. And in fact, it also became crucial even when informing the rest of the world about your arrest. Now that you're not allowed to be on social media, what is life going to look like under this ban that comes as part of your conditions of release?
The correct position, after I read the ruling by Judge Chitapi, is that I'm allowed to be on social media, but I'm not allowed to talk about protests or to talk about violence whilst on Twitter. And so it doesn't affect me at all because I never advocated or called for violence against the Zimbabwean government or against anyone for that matter.
And the fact that, well, because of lockdown, movement would have been limited and restricted anyway, but the fact that your passports have been confiscated, has it crossed your mind at any time to leave Zimbabwe, seek asylum elsewhere?
It hasn't crossed my mind. You know, I spent 11 years of my young adult years in Britain and in America. And I specifically came back home because I wanted to contribute towards my country's emancipation, because during the Mugabe years, we were fighting for freedom. And when the current president came into power, Emmerson Mnangagwa, he promised everyone, you know, that he was going to change, he was going to do things differently. And we thought we had achieved something, but he's turned out to be worse than Mugabe. So I have no intention of leaving, because this is my country. Leaving is capitulating and allowing the bad guys to carry on doing the bad things. It is our country. I'm prepared to die for this cause of fighting corruption and doing my journalism here if need be.
It comes at a great cost to you personally, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks, but also to your family. Speak to me about the experience that they've been going through simply because you've been identified as a target.
As you would imagine, family members get traumatized because, as you know, as a journalist, there are certain things that we are able to deal with. We have shock absorbers when it comes to some of these things, especially the persecution. But for my family, they were worried. Most of them are outside the country, so it was even more difficult because they were not able to come and see me at court. They would have to get reports through news channels like yours and to understand what was going on around my case. They were not able to speak to me, so it was a very difficult time. But this is something I had prepared them for years. I've been doing this for quite a long time, for almost 2 decades now. So they sort of understand that it comes with the terrain, but it's something that one never gets used to.
What is it that those who support your cause can do in this moment for you, Hopewell, and I think for other journalists who are on the ground in Zimbabwe right now, who you're telling us are coming under increasing threat?
I think what Zimbabwean citizens, Africans, and the rest of the world can do is to put pressure on the Zimbabwean government and Mnangagwa to respect the rule of law. We have one of the best constitutions in the world, if only it was being followed. But the president and his regime, they violate all the constitutional rights that are entitled to citizens. For instance, whilst I was consulting with my lawyers, they insisted on listening on what I was discussing with my lawyers, something that goes against our constitution. I had to go to the High Court to get a High Court order so that they would not open the doors whilst I was talking to my lawyers. So the world can put pressure, and countries like South Africa can do more by putting pressure on Mnangagwa and his regime to make sure that they follow the rule of law. Once they follow the rule of law, Zimbabwe's problems will go away. We have got a lot of minerals in Zimbabwe. We have a lot of natural resources, but they're going to waste because they are being shared by a few and the rest of the country is not getting anything. And that comes to the center of what I've been talking about. The corruption is about the failure to follow the rule of law, which then allows them to loot public funds, to plunder natural resources, and to allow the whole state to be generally corrupt.
Given your experience, Hopewell, and we have to wrap up this interview soon, do you have a sense that the political elite in Zimbabwe have captured the justice system there?
Yes, they have captured. In fact, one of the tweets which they are using to charge me mentions exactly that. And it is captured in my bail judgment. Where Justice Chitapi gave me bail, and how he could ignore testimony and then accuse. This country is in a total mess on so many fronts. I'll give you an example of how bad things are. Over 2,000 women die giving birth in Zimbabwe. And the biggest hospital in Zimbabwe, Harare Hospital, has got only 2 operating maternity theaters. They were built in 1977, and only 1 is working. And yet we've got these guys running the state, buying Land Cruisers, building mansions, and yet 2,000 women are dying. To give you a context, 2,000 women dying giving birth is the equivalent of 15 jumbo jets crashing every year in Zimbabwe and killing pregnant women.